You stupid kid. The words of a billionaire echoed through a penthouse suite. Seconds later, his $7.5 billion empire began to crumble. Helen Carter, a maid who had mastered the art of being invisible, was there with her daughter, Clara. Clara was supposed to be silent, tucked away in the corner with her sketchbook, while titans of industry negotiated a deal that could change the world. But when a single yellow crayon rolled across the white carpet, everything unraveled. Marcus Thorne, the kind of man who measured life in profit margins, didn't see a child. He saw an interruption. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You stupid kid." The words froze the room, silenced the air, and sealed his fate. What he didn't know was that in that instant, his empire had just begun to collapse. A 10-year-old girl's dropped crayon would cost a ruthless billionaire $7.5 billion. Clara didn't know this, of course. She only knew her mother's hand felt a little tighter in hers today, a silent warning that this was a world where children were meant to be invisible. Helen Carter believed in quiet work, the kind of work that left no trace behind, except for perfection. For 12 years, she had been a ghost in the grandest homes and most exclusive hotel suites in the city. She polished marble floors until they looked like still water. She erased fingerprints from glass tables that overlooked the entire world. She made beds with corners so sharp they could have cut paper. Helen was a maid, but in her heart, she was a guardian of peace and order. Her work was her dignity. Her daughter, Clara, was her world. At 10 years old, Clara had her mother's quiet nature but her father's bright, curious eyes. Her hair was the color of pale corn silk, and she carried a small, worn sketchbook everywhere she went. Inside it, she captured the world not as it was, but as it felt. A grumpy-looking pigeon, the smiling face of the man at the corner store, the tired lines around her mother's eyes when she came home late. Today, Clara was not in school. A burst pipe had closed the building for emergency repairs, and there was no one else to watch her. So, for the first time ever, Helen had brought her daughter to work. Not to a regular home, but to the penthouse suite of the Grand Majestic Hotel. A place so high, the clouds felt like neighbors. "Now, you remember the rules, my love?" Helen whispered, her voice soft as she knelt in the service elevator. Clara nodded, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "Be a little mouse," she recited. "Quiet, still, and out of the way. And you stay right in that little chair I showed you," Helen added, tucking a loose strand of blonde hair behind Clara's ear. "No matter what. These are very important men meeting today. They can't be disturbed." "I know, Mama." The elevator doors opened with a gentle chime, revealing a world of silent luxury. The suite was bigger than their entire apartment building. A vast expanse of white carpet stretched toward a wall of glass that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. The air was cool and still, smelling faintly of leather and lemon polish. In a small alcove near the service entrance, a simple wooden chair sat waiting. It was the only piece of furniture in the room that looked like it belonged to the real world. Clara settled into her designated spot. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page and selected a blue crayon. She began to draw the city, not as a collection of buildings, but as a forest of giants sleeping under a calm sky. Her mother moved through the suite with silent efficiency, making final touches. She straightened a stack of files on the massive mahogany conference table. She filled a crystal pitcher with ice water and arranged a dozen glasses, each one gleaming under the soft, recessed lighting. She was a shadow, ensuring the stage was perfectly set. They did not have to wait long. The first arrival was Marcus Thorne. He didn't walk into the room, he conquered it. He was a man built of sharp angles and expensive fabric. His suit was a dark, severe gray, his shoes shone like black mirrors, and his voice cut through the quiet air like a razor. He was on the phone, barking orders. "No, not tomorrow. Now. I don't pay people to think, I pay them to execute," he snapped, striding toward the window. He didn't glance at Helen. He didn't seem to register Clara's small presence in the corner at all. To him, they were part of the furniture, silent and inanimate. He ended his call and tossed his phone onto the table with a loud clatter that made Clara flinch. He saw the water pitcher and gestured impatiently at Helen without looking at her. "Water. Now." Helen moved forward instantly, her expression unreadable. She poured him a glass with a steady hand. He took it without a word of thanks, his eyes already scanning a report on the table. He was the CEO of Omnicorp Global, a tech giant that had devoured its competition. He had built his empire on a simple principle. Weakness was a disease, and you had to cut it out before it spread. He saw weakness everywhere. In an employee who hesitated, in a rival who offered a compromise, and especially in people who served him. The second arrival was a different kind of man altogether. His name was General James Peterson. He was in his late 70s, with a full head of white hair and a posture that spoke of a lifetime of discipline. He wasn't tall or imposing, but he moved with a quiet authority that filled the space around him. His suit was simple, dark blue, and well-worn. Unlike Thorne, he paused when he entered. His eyes, a clear and piercing blue, took in the entire room. He nodded politely to Thorne's junior executives who had followed him in. Then his gaze fell on Helen. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. He offered her a small, respectful smile. Helen was so taken aback, she almost forgot to respond. "Good morning, sir." Then, General Peterson noticed Clara. He saw the small girl in the corner, her head bent over a sketchbook, her blonde hair catching the morning light. His expression softened. He didn't say anything, but he gave her a gentle, grandfatherly wink before turning his attention to Marcus Thorne. Clara, who had peeked up from her drawing, felt a warmth spread through her chest. She quickly looked back down at her page, a small smile on her lips. The meeting began. Marcus Thorne was a storm of words and numbers. He spoke of synergy, disruption, and market dominance. He pointed at charts projected onto a screen that appeared from the ceiling. He was selling his vision, his power. He wanted General Peterson to invest $7.5 billion to acquire a smaller, innovative robotics firm. It was the biggest deal of Thorne's career, one that would cement his legacy. General Peterson, however, was quiet. He listened more than he spoke. When he did ask a question, it was never about the profit margins. "Tell me about the team at the robotics firm," the general asked, his hands folded calmly on the table. "The engineers, the designers. What happens to them after you take over?" Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "Redundancies will be managed. We'll keep the essential talent, of course. The rest is just dead weight. You have to trim the fat to grow, General. That's business 101. The general's face remained neutral, but his blue eyes seemed to grow a little colder. He said nothing, simply nodding for Thorne to continue. Clara kept drawing. She had finished the city and was now sketching the men at the table. She drew Mr. Thorne as a jagged mountain with a thundercloud over his peak. She drew the general as a sturdy old oak tree, its branches reaching out calmly. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice one of her crayons, a bright yellow one, roll off the edge of her little sketchbook. It fell silently onto the white carpet and rolled under the massive conference table. She saw it a moment later. It was right near the general's feet. She remembered her mother's words, "Be a little mouse. Stay out of the way." But the yellow crayon was her son. She couldn't leave it there. Waiting for a moment when Mr. Thorne was busy pointing at his screen, Clara slipped off her chair. She crept on her hands and knees, a tiny shadow moving along the edge of the room. She was trying to be invisible, just like her mother had taught her. She reached the table and slid underneath, moving silently toward the lost crayon. Her fingers were just inches away. At that exact moment, one of Thorne's executives, trying to impress his boss, leaned forward with enthusiasm and bumped the table leg with his knee. The movement was slight, but it was enough. The glass of ice water in front of Marcus Thorne wobbled. It tipped, not away from him, but onto a stack of printed financial projections sitting beside his elbow. It wasn't a flood. It was just a small pool of water, soaking into a few dozen pages of unimportant paper. But Marcus Thorne's reaction was volcanic. His presentation stopped mid-sentence. His face, which had been a mask of confident salesmanship, twisted into a snarl of pure fury. "What the?" he began, his eyes scanning for the source of the disruption. And then he saw it. A flash of blonde hair disappearing back under the table. Clara had her yellow crayon. She was scurrying back to her chair when she heard the roar. "You." Thorne was on his feet, his finger pointing not at his clumsy executive, but at the space where Clara had been. Helen rushed forward, her hands clasped in apology, her face pale with fear. "Sir, I am so sorry," she. But Thorne wasn't listening. He looked past Helen as Clara emerged from under the table, her eyes wide with fright. He looked down at this 10-year-old child, this insignificant distraction who had dared to interrupt his billion-dollar pitch. The fury in his eyes was cold and absolute. In front of General James Peterson, in front of his own team, in front of a mother trying to protect her child, Marcus Thorne leaned down slightly and spat the words. "Get out of here. What is wrong with you? You stupid kid." The room went completely silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to suddenly roar. The city outside the window held its breath. Helen froze, her apology dying on her lips. Clara stood paralyzed, the yellow crayon clutched in her hand, her face crumpling as two large tears began to trace paths down her cheeks. And across the table, General James Peterson slowly, deliberately, placed his pen down. He did not look at Marcus Thorne. His gaze was fixed on the crying 10-year-old girl, and his face was as still and hard as granite. The meeting was over. The deal was dead, and Marcus Thorne had absolutely no idea. The two words echoed in the vast, silent room. "Stupid kid." They hung in the air long after the sound had faded, like a stain that couldn't be wiped away. For a long moment, no one moved. Marcus Thorne's executives stared at the polished mahogany of the table, as if finding it suddenly fascinating. They held their breath, waiting for a signal from their leader. Helen was the first to break the spell. Her training, her years of remaining invisible and professional, took over. But it was different now. This was not about a spilled drink or a smudge on a window. This was about her daughter. She moved forward, her steps measured and calm, but inside her, a storm of fury and fear was raging. She reached Clara and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come, little mouse," she whispered, her voice miraculously steady. She did not look at Marcus Thorne. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger or her tears. She guided Clara, who was still clutching the yellow crayon, toward the service door. As they passed the conference table, General Peterson's eyes met Helen's for a fraction of a second. In his gaze, she saw no pity. She saw something else, a deep, quiet understanding, a shared recognition of an injustice. It was a look that said, "I see you." It was enough to give her the strength to hold her head high as she walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving the powerful men in a silence that was now thick with unspoken judgment. Marcus Thorne watched them go, his lip curled in annoyance. He saw the incident not as a moment of cruelty, but as a breach of protocol, a messy, emotional distraction. He turned back to the room, ready to resume his command. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, my apologies for that interruption, General. Unprofessional. It won't happen again." He gestured toward the screen, where a graph showed a steep upward curve. "Now, as I was saying, our Q4 projections are unprecedented. We're not just leading the market. We are the market." He tried to recapture the energy, the relentless forward momentum that had always worked for him. But the room had changed. The air was heavy. His voice, which moments before had sounded powerful, now seemed to just echo in the stillness. His junior executives shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat and offered a weak, supportive nod. General Peterson did not look at the screen. He picked up the single sheet of paper that summarized the acquisition proposal. He read it, though he had already memorized every word. His movements were slow, deliberate. He was taking back control of the moment, not with volume, but with silence. Thorne's voice faltered. He was talking to a wall of calm, unshakable disapproval. "General?" Thorne prompted, a hint of irritation creeping into his tone. "Your thoughts on the asset allocation?" General Peterson placed the paper down, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. "The numbers are impressive, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice even. "Paper is patient. It will hold any number you write on it." It was not a compliment. Thorne felt a prickle of unease. He was used to commanding respect, or at least fear. He was not used to being quietly dismissed. He pushed forward, doubling down on his aggressive strategy. "It's not just the numbers, it's the philosophy. We're lean. We're hungry. We don't tolerate inefficiency. We don't coddle weakness. That's how you build an empire that lasts." As Thorne spoke, the general's mind drifted. It drifted back 50 years, to a muddy trench in a jungle half a world away. He wasn't seeing a billion-dollar projection. He was seeing the face of a young sergeant named Michael Carter. Michael had not been a big man. He was quiet, thoughtful, and had a smile that could calm the most terrified new recruit. He wasn't a CEO. He was a leader. The general remembered a specific moment, seared into his memory forever. They had been pinned down by enemy fire. A young private, no older than 18, had panicked and dropped his rifle in the open. He froze, paralyzed by fear. Their commander, a man much like Thorne, loud, arrogant, and dismissive of anything he deemed weakness, had screamed at the boy to leave the rifle, to save himself. But Sergeant Michael Carter had done the opposite. He had low-crawled out into the line of fire, not for the weapon, but for the soldier. He reached the terrified private and put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't shout. He spoke in a low, calm voice. "It's all right, son. We're going to get back together. Just follow me." He had shielded the boy with his own body as they crawled back to safety. 2 weeks later, Michael Carter was killed doing the same for another man. He had died protecting the weak. He had died proving that true strength wasn't about shouting and dominating. It was about sheltering others from the storm. "Weakness," General Peterson repeated softly, his voice pulling him back to the present. He looked directly at Marcus Thorne, and for the first time, Thorne saw the steel beneath the calm exterior. "It can be a subjective term, Mr. Thorne." Meanwhile, in the quiet, sterile light of the service corridor, Helen knelt before her daughter. She gently took the sketchbook from Clara's hands and used her own handkerchief to wipe the tears from her daughter's face. "Hey," she said softly, tilting Clara's chin up. "You look at me. You are not stupid. Do you hear me? You are the smartest, kindest, most wonderful girl in the whole world." "But he was so angry, Mama," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I made the water spill." "No, sweetheart. A table leg was bumped. A glass tipped over. That is an accident. That man's anger, that is not an accident. That is a choice. He chooses to be cruel because he thinks it makes him look strong. But it doesn't. It makes him look small." She hugged Clara tightly, rocking her gently. "His words have nothing to do with you. They are about him. Don't you ever let a man like that make you feel small." Clara sniffled, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. She still felt the sting of the insult, the shame of being yelled at in front of everyone. But her mother's words were a shield. They were the truth, and they felt more real than the billionaire's angry voice. Is you're going to lose your job?" Clara asked, her biggest fear now surfacing. Helen paused. She honestly didn't know. A man like Thorne could get her fired with a single phone call. But she would not let her daughter see her fear. "We will be all right," she said, her voice full of a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "You and me. We are a team. We are always all right." Back in the penthouse, Marcus Thorne's presentation had ground to a halt. The air was too thick to push through. He finally abandoned his slides and leaned forward, trying to create a sense of intimacy, of a frank conversation between two powerful men. "Look, General, let's be candid. The world is a tough place. It's a battlefield. You of all people should understand that. You either dominate, or you get dominated. My methods get results. Isn't that what matters in the end?" General Peterson let the question hang in the air for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. The meeting was not over because he was leaving. The meeting was over because he had made his decision. "Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Thorne," he said, his tone formal and final. It was very illuminating. Thorne, finally sensing the disaster unfolding, stood up as well. A desperate, forced smile plastered on his face. "So, are we ready to talk next steps? My legal team is ready to go." The general walked around the table, not toward the main door, but toward the small alcove where Clara's chair sat empty. Her sketchbook was still there, lying open. He picked it up gently. On the page was the drawing of the jagged mountain with the thundercloud, and next to it, the sturdy, old oak tree. He looked at the drawing for a long moment, then turned to face Thorne. "When I led men, Mr. Thorne, I learned that a team is only as strong as its trust in the person in charge. They need to know that their leader will have their back, especially when they make a mistake. They need to know he values their humanity more than his own ambition." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "You build your empire on fear. Fear is brittle. It shatters under pressure. I prefer to build on a foundation of character. It's the only thing that lasts." He closed the sketchbook and tucked it under his arm. "There will be no next steps," the general said quietly, but his words landed with the force of a gavel. "We will not be moving forward with the acquisition. Thank you for your time." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Marcus Thorne standing in the middle of his silent, opulent penthouse, surrounded by his terrified executives. For the first time in his life, the titan of industry looked utterly, completely small. The $7.5 billion deal had vanished, not because of a bad number or a faulty projection, but because of a dropped yellow crayon and the ugly truth it had revealed. For a full minute after General Peterson departed, Marcus Thorne did not move. He stood as if frozen, his power draining away into the thick white carpet. The silence in the room was no longer respectful. It was suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb, and he was the one being buried. His executives, who had spent their careers anticipating his moods and fearing his anger, now watched him with a new kind of expression, a detached, clinical curiosity. They were watching a king who had just been publicly dethroned. Finally, Thorne's paralysis broke. He slammed his fist down on the mahogany table with a force that made the remaining water glasses jump. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "Who does he think he is?" Thorne roared, his face a mask of purple fury. He wasn't asking a question. He was venting a pressure that had been building his entire life. The pressure to always be the smartest, the toughest, the most ruthless man in any room. Some dusty old fossil, lecturing me about character? I built a $100 billion company from nothing. What has he ever built? He just followed orders. He began to pace the length of the room, a caged tiger lashing out at the bars. He spun on his senior vice president, a man named Henderson who had been with him for a decade. "And you?" Thorne jabbed a finger at him. "You just sat there? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you handle it?" Henderson, a man who had weathered countless tirades, simply looked back at his boss, his face pale. What could he have said? What could anyone have said? The general hadn't been angry. He had been disappointed. You could fight anger. You couldn't fight the quiet, unshakable weight of another man's principles. "Handle what, Marcus?" Henderson asked, his voice barely a whisper. He made up his mind. He made up his mind because of a maid and her brat. Thorne spat, the words dripping with venom. The ugliness that he usually kept hidden behind a veneer of corporate jargon was now on full display. Because of a spilled glass of water. $7.5 billion gone. Do you understand what this means for us? For the stock? For our Q3 earnings call. He was spiraling, grasping for the familiar metrics of his world. Stocks, earnings, power, but they felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He had lost, and he had lost in a way he couldn't comprehend. He hadn't been outmaneuvered or outsmarted. He had been judged, and he had been found wanting. He stormed over to the phone on the console and jabbed a button. "Get me hotel security. Now." He was going to make someone pay. Someone small. Someone vulnerable. "I want that maid fired. I want her blacklisted. She will never work in this city again." It was a petty, cruel act of a man trying to reclaim a shred of his lost power. It was the only language he knew. Helen and Clara did not take the service elevator down. Helen, in a small act of defiance, led her daughter through the main lobby. She wanted Clara to see the beautiful chandeliers, the polished floors, and the well-dressed people, not as a place where she had been shamed, but simply as a place. A place they were leaving. She held her daughter's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. The city air, thick with the smell of traffic and hot pretzels, felt like freedom. They walked to the bus stop in silence, the noise of the city wrapping around them like a blanket. Clara was no longer crying, but she was quiet, her small face set in a thoughtful expression. She watched the people rushing by, each one lost in their own world. They found a seat at the back of the bus. As the vehicle lurched into motion, pulling away from the gleaming towers of the financial district, Helen finally spoke. "You know," she said, looking out the window, "your grandfather, my dad, he was a soldier. Like that man in the meeting, the general." Clara looked up, surprised. Her mother rarely spoke of her grandfather. He had died long before Clara was born, and the single photograph she had of him showed a young man with a kind smile and sad eyes. "He was a hero," Helen continued, her voice soft with memory. "Not because he was the strongest or the loudest. He was a hero because he was kind. He believed that looking after people was the most important job in the world. He used to say that you can always judge a man's strength by how he treats someone who can do nothing for him." Clara thought about the angry man in the big room. He had been loud. He had seemed strong, but he hadn't been kind. Then she thought about the general. He had been quiet, but his eyes had been kind. He had winked at her. He had picked up her sketchbook. "Like the general?" Clara asked. Helen smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, my love. Exactly like the general." She didn't know if she still had a job. She didn't know how she would pay the rent next month if she didn't. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. But sitting there, on a rumbling city bus with her daughter's head resting on her shoulder, she felt a sense of peace. She had her father's principles. She had her daughter's love. She had her dignity. No billionaire could ever take those things away from her. General James Peterson did not go back to his office. He had his driver take him to a place he hadn't visited in years, the National War Memorial. It was a quiet, solemn place, a wall of polished black granite etched with thousands of names. He walked slowly along the wall, his hand hovering over the surface, his mind quiet. He had lied to Marcus Thorne. He had not come to the meeting to be convinced. He had come to the meeting hoping to be wrong. For weeks, his investment team had been pushing the Omnicorp acquisition. The numbers were, as he had said, impressive. Thorne was a ruthless genius when it came to making money. But Peterson had a different system for vetting partners, one that wasn't on any balance sheet. He always did his own research into the character of the person he was about to do business with. He had heard stories about Thorne, his temper, his arrogance, his treatment of employees. Today was not a pitch, it was a test. A test Thorne had failed spectacularly. The general stopped walking. He had found the name he was looking for. He gently traced the engraved letters with his fingertips. Michael J. Carter. "Hello, Mike," he whispered to the wall. "It's been a while." He stood there for a long time, lost in thought. He thought about the young sergeant who had saved his life and the lives of so many others. He thought about the debt he could never repay. After the war, he had tried to find Michael's family, but they had moved, and the trail went cold. He had never stopped looking. The name Carter on the maid's uniform name tag this morning had been a coincidence, he was sure. It was a common name, but it had been a spark, a reminder. When the little girl had crept under the table, he hadn't seen a clumsy child. He had seen courage. The same quiet, determined courage Michael Carter had shown crawling out into enemy fire for a fallen comrade. And when Thorne had unleashed his venom on that child, he hadn't just insulted a little girl. He had desecrated the memory of everything men like Sergeant Carter had died for: decency, honor, and the protection of the innocent. General Peterson took out his phone. He did not call his investment team. He called his personal assistant, a woman who had been with him for 30 years and was known for her ability to find anyone, anywhere. "Eleanor," he said, his voice firm with new purpose. "I have a job for you. I need you to find someone. Her name is Helen Carter. She works as a maid, possibly for the agency that services the Grand Majestic Hotel. She has a 10-year-old daughter named Clara." He paused, looking at the name on the wall. "And I need you to do a deep dive. Find out everything you can about her family history. Specifically, I want to know about her father." He ended the call and tucked the phone away. He had the sketchbook with him. He opened it again to the drawing of the jagged mountain and the sturdy oak tree. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was not over. For Marcus Thorne, it was the end of a deal. For General Peterson, it was the beginning of a promise. A promise he had made to a ghost on a black granite wall 50 years ago. He was finally going to pay his debt to Sergeant Michael Carter. The call from the hotel manager came less than an hour after Helen and Clara arrived home. Their apartment was small but clean, filled with the comforting smell of laundry soap and the quiet hum of an old refrigerator. Clara was at the small kitchen table, her sketchbook open, carefully coloring in the oak tree from her drawing, making its leaves a vibrant, hopeful green. Helen answered the phone, her heart sinking as she recognized the manager's brisk, impersonal voice. "Helen, it's Mr. Davies from the Grand Majestic," he began, without any preamble. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. There was an incident today in the penthouse suite. A complaint was filed by a very important client, Mr. Marcus Thorne." Helen stood very still, her back to her daughter, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "I see." He was quite adamant. Davies continued, his voice laced with the weary stress of someone who has to clean up a billionaire's messes. "He's demanding your immediate termination. He also mentioned making sure your agency is aware of the circumstances." The threat was clear. It wasn't just about this one job. It was about her reputation, her ability to find any job. Helen took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in her lungs. She thought of Clara, happily drawing, oblivious to the storm that was breaking over their lives. She thought of her father and his quiet strength. You can always judge a man's strength by how he treats someone who can do nothing for him. And in that moment, she realized she could do something. She could refuse to be a victim. Mr. Davies, she said, her voice quiet but firm, completely devoid of the panic he expected. I have been a model employee for this hotel and for my agency for 12 years. My record is perfect. I will not be fired because a powerful man had a temper tantrum and chose to take it out on my 10-year-old daughter. If you fire me based on this complaint, I will be speaking to the press. Not to make a scene, but to tell the truth about what happened in that room today. About what kind of man Marcus Thorne really is. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Hotel managers were used to dealing with angry employees, with pleading, with tears. They were not used to dealing with calm, unbreakable dignity. Mr. Davies, who had been bracing for an argument, was completely disarmed. He knew Thorne was a bully. He also knew that a story about a ruthless CEO screaming at a maid's child was exactly the kind of viral news story that could cause a massive headache for the hotel's pristine public image. Helen, he stammered. I am a good worker, Mr. Davies, Helen said, finishing her thought. But more than that, I am a good mother. I will not allow my child to be used as a scapegoat for a rich man's bad day. I will be in for my shift tomorrow, as scheduled. What you and Mr. Thorne decide to do after that is up to you. She hung up the phone. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt terrified, but she also felt a sliver of pride. She had not shouted. She had not pleaded. She had simply stood her ground on the firm foundation of the truth. She looked over at Clara, who had now added a bright yellow sun above the green tree. Helen walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Everything is going to be all right, my love, she said. And for the first time, she truly believed it. Across town, Eleanor, General Peterson's assistant, was a whirlwind of quiet efficiency. She was a woman in her late 60s with the sharp mind of a master detective and the digital footprint of a ghost. She could navigate databases and public records with the same ease that her boss could read a battlefield map. The name Helen Carter and her connection to the Grand Majestic was all she needed. Within 2 hours, she had a complete file on the general's desk. It was a simple, unassuming life. Helen Carter, born in Ohio, moved to the city 12 years ago after her husband, a construction worker, died in a workplace accident. One child, Clara, 10 years old. A spotless employment record. No criminal history. No financial trouble beyond the usual struggles of a single mother on a maid's salary. But it was the next section of the report that made the general lean forward. Family history. Helen's father, Sergeant Michael J. Carter, born in the same small town in Ohio as the general. Enlisted in the Army at 18. Served in the same division, the same platoon. Awarded the Silver Star for valor. Killed in action. The dates and places matched perfectly. It was him. Eleanor, anticipating the general's next question, had already gone a step further. She had cross-referenced military archives and pension records. Sergeant Carter's military pension and life insurance benefits had been paid out to his young wife, who had passed away from pneumonia just a few years later. The remaining funds, meant to be held in trust for his only child, Helen, had been managed by a small, local bank. That bank had gone bankrupt in the financial crisis of the late 80s. The trust had vanished. Through a combination of tragedy and bureaucratic failure, Michael Carter's daughter had received almost nothing of the legacy he had left for her. General Peterson read the final page of the report, his expression unreadable. He looked at the photo of Sergeant Carter clipped to the file, the same young man from his memories, with the kind smile and the sad eyes. Then he looked at the recent photo of Helen, a security badge photo from the hotel. He saw the same eyes, the same quiet strength, the same resilience. The coincidence was so profound it felt like an intervention from the past. He had gone to that meeting to test a man's character and had instead found the daughter of the man who had defined character for him. He picked up the phone. Eleanor, get me our head of legal, David Chun, he commanded, and find out who holds the commercial lease for the headquarters of Omnicorp Global. I believe it's the Thorne Tower downtown. I want to know who the ultimate owner of that building is. He was no longer just an investor pulling out of a deal. He was a general, planning a campaign. Marcus Thorne had made a powerful enemy, but not for the reasons he thought. He hadn't just lost a business deal. He had awakened a sleeping giant of loyalty and honor. He had picked a fight with a ghost, and the general was about to give that ghost his full and undivided attention. Thorne had tried to ruin a good woman's life over a spilled glass of water. He had no idea that he was about to be swept away by a tidal wave of consequences, set in motion 50 years ago in a muddy trench half a world away. The next morning, Helen Carter walked into the Grand Majestic Hotel with her head held high. She wore her simple, clean uniform like a suit of armor. The other staff members in the locker room avoided her eyes, whispering amongst themselves. The news had already spread through the hotel's intricate gossip network. Helen Carter had crossed Marcus Thorne and was going to be fired. She was a dead woman walking. Helen ignored the whispers. She clocked in, collected her cart, and went to her assigned floor. She worked with the same quiet diligence she always had, her movements practiced and efficient. She cleaned rooms, replaced linens, and polished surfaces until they gleamed. With every swipe of her cloth, she felt a sense of calm purpose. She was doing her job. She was earning her living. She was not a victim. She was a worker, and her work had dignity. Mid-morning, Mr. Davies, the hotel manager, appeared at the end of the hallway. He was a man who was used to walking with brisk authority, but today his steps were hesitant. He approached Helen as she was leaving a room. "Helen," he said, his voice low. "Could I have a word?" Helen turned to face him, her expression neutral. "Of course, Mr. Davies." He wrung his hands, a gesture so unlike his usual confident demeanor that it was startling. I received another call from Mr. Thorne's office this morning. His assistant. They were insistent about your termination." Helen waited, saying nothing. "And I have to be honest with you," Davies continued, looking down the hall as if to make sure no one was listening. "My first instinct was to do exactly what he asked. He's a powerful man, the kind of man you don't say no to." He finally met her eyes. "But then you said what you said on the phone yesterday, about telling the truth, and it made me think." He paused, taking a deep breath. "This hotel has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it on the principle of service, yes, but also on respect. Respect for the guests, and respect for the staff who make this place run. We are not in the business of letting bullies push our people around." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made Helen dizzy washed over her. "So, you can consider the matter closed," Mr. Davies said, a new firmness in his voice. "You are a valued employee, Helen. Your job is safe here. As for Mr. Thorne, he is no longer welcome at the Grand Majestic Hotel. We will be terminating our corporate account with Omnicorp this afternoon." It was an act of quiet, corporate courage that would cost the hotel millions of dollars in the short term. But Mr. Davies stood a little taller after he said it. He had chosen decency over profit. He had honored his grandfather's legacy. Helen was speechless. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she finally managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." He simply nodded, gave her a small, respectful smile, and walked away. Helen leaned against her cart for a moment, her eyes closed. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude. At the top of the gleaming Thorne Tower, Marcus Thorne was in a state of controlled fury. The news of the failed deal had not yet leaked to the press, but the internal fallout was catastrophic. His board of directors was demanding an explanation. His stock was already showing signs of a nervous wobble in pre-market trading based on whispers and rumors alone. And now this, an email from the Grand Majestic Hotel, terminating their lucrative corporate account. It was a slap in the face. A public humiliation from a glorified innkeeper. "Insignificant gnats," he yelled, slamming his office door shut. He was a man who understood power in terms of scale. Billions of dollars. Global markets. Corporate dominance. He could not comprehend being defied by people he considered beneath his notice. A maid, a hotel manager. It was an inversion of the natural order of his world. His intercom buzzed. It was his assistant. "Sir, a David Chun is on line 1 for you. He says he's the chief legal counsel for Peterson Industries." Thorne's mood shifted instantly. A flicker of hope. Maybe the old man had reconsidered. Maybe this was a call to renegotiate. He smoothed his tie, took a calming breath, and composed his face into a mask of professional confidence. He sat behind his massive desk, the symbol of his power, and picked up the phone. "Marcus Thorne speaking." "Mr. Thorne," came a smooth, calm voice. "My name is David Chun. As I said, I represent General Peterson. I'm calling today not about the acquisition, which is permanently off the table, but regarding another business matter. The building you're in. Thorn Tower. Thorn stiffened. What about it? Peterson Industries, through a subsidiary holding company, is the ultimate owner of the property at 101 Park Avenue, Chin said, his tone matter-of-fact. Omnicorp Global is a tenant. Your lease is up for renewal in 60 days. I am calling to inform you that we will not be renewing that lease. We will also be exercising our contractual right to rename the building, effective immediately. A team will be arriving this afternoon to remove the lettering from the facade. The silence that followed was absolute. Thorn felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't business. This was personal. This was a targeted, strategic demolition of his pride. Thorn Tower was more than just a building to him. It was a monument to his ego, a giant, gleaming testament to his success that scraped the sky. And the general was tearing it down. You can't do that, Thorn whispered, the words catching in his throat. I assure you, Mr. Thorn, our legal position is ironclad, Chin replied, his voice still infuriatingly calm. We are also aware of your attempt to have Ms. Helen Carter, a hotel employee, terminated from her position. I would strongly advise you to cease any and all actions of that nature. General Peterson takes matters of character and professional integrity very seriously. The line went dead. Marcus Thorn sat at his desk, in his office, in the tower that would no longer bear his name, and for the first time, he felt a genuine, chilling fear. He had been so focused on the battlefield in front of him that he had never thought to look up. He had never realized that the ground he was standing on, the very foundation of his empire, belonged to his enemy. The general wasn't just refusing to do business with him. He was evicting him. He was erasing him. That afternoon, a simple, unmarked envelope arrived by courier at Helen's apartment. There was no return address. Inside, she found two things. The first was Clara's sketchbook. The second was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. It was a letter, typed in a simple, elegant font. Dear Miss Carter, your daughter is a gifted artist. She sees the world with a clear and honest eye. I hope you will encourage her talent. I knew your father. I served with him. He was the finest man I have ever known, and he saved my life at great personal cost. He spoke of you often. His greatest hope was that you would grow up in a world that was kinder than the one he fought in. I have failed, in my life, to repay the debt I owe him. I see now that I have been looking in the wrong places. Enclosed you will find the beginnings of a long, overdue repayment. Your father's legacy is not just one of heroism, but of the decency and strength he passed on to you. You honored him and his memory with your courage yesterday. Do not let anyone ever make you feel small again. Sincerely, James Peterson. Tucked behind the letter was a check. When Helen looked at it, her hands began to tremble so violently that she had to sit down. The amount was staggering. It was more money than she could have earned in 100 lifetimes. It was enough to buy a house, to pay for college, to ensure Clara would never have to worry about anything ever again. Clara came over, drawn by her mother's silence. Is that my sketchbook, Mama? Did the kind man bring it back? Helen pulled her daughter into her arms, burying her face in her soft, blonde hair, the tears finally coming, not of gratitude or relief, but of a deep, profound sense of connection to the father she had never known. The check was not charity. It was a message sent across 50 years of silence. It was a hero's legacy, finally delivered to his daughter. The downfall of Marcus Thorn was not a sudden, explosive event. It was a quiet, systematic dismantling, like a great ship being taken apart rivet by rivet. Being forced out of his own tower was the first, most public humiliation. He sat in a temporary, sterile office space across town, watching on a live news feed as a crane crew meticulously removed the giant, steel letters of his name from the building's facade. Each letter that swung away seemed to take a piece of his identity with it. He wasn't just losing a name on a building. He was being erased. The story, as these things do, began to leak. It started not in the major financial papers, but in the corners of the internet where assistants, hotel workers, and junior executives shared stories. The tale of the billionaire, the maid, the 10-year-old girl, and the war hero general was too perfect, too potent, to stay secret. It had the simple, powerful resonance of a fable. It spread like wildfire. A hotel valet's tweet about seeing General Peterson leave with a child's sketchbook went viral. A blog post from a former Omnicorp intern detailing Thorne's legendary temper gained millions of views. Within days, Clara's drawing of the jagged mountain with the thundercloud was everywhere, an instantly iconic meme that perfectly captured the public's perception of corporate arrogance. It was simple, childish, and utterly devastating. Major news outlets, smelling blood in the water, picked up the scent. The narrative was no longer about a failed acquisition. It was a referendum on a man's character. Headlines blared, "Billion-dollar bully, the CEO and the crayon. How a child's drawing toppled a titan." Thorne's attempts to control the narrative were useless. He released a cold, corporate statement about a private business matter that has been grossly misrepresented. He tried to buy silence, sending his lawyers after bloggers and news sites with threats of defamation suits. But it was like trying to stop the tide with a teacup. The world had already seen the drawing. It had already judged him. Inside Omnicorp, the empire of fear was collapsing. The board of directors, men and women who had once trembled at Thorne's approach, now saw him as a liability. The stock had lost 30% of its value in a week. Major clients were pulling their contracts, not wanting to be associated with the billion-dollar bully. In a hastily called emergency meeting in a conference room that felt like a bunker, they confronted him. "This is a disaster, Marcus," said one board member, a man who had been his staunchest ally for years. "The brand is toxic. This is a temporary storm." Thorne roared, his face flushed, his last vestiges of control slipping. "It's a media fabrication. We ride it out. We show strength." But they weren't listening anymore. The fear he had cultivated for so long had been replaced by a more powerful fear, the fear of their own ruin. They had seen his weakness, his inability to control a situation that wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. "The vote is unanimous, Marcus," the chairman said, his voice flat and final. "We're invoking the morals clause in your contract. You are to step down as CEO, effective immediately." He was given a severance package, a golden parachute that was still a fortune to anyone else, but an insult to him, and was escorted from the building by security. As he walked through the lobby, the employees he had terrorized for years did not jeer or celebrate. They simply watched him go, their faces blank. Their silence was the most profound indictment of all. Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, vanished from the public eye, his legacy not one of innovation or success, but of a single, ugly phrase whispered in meeting rooms and cafeterias for years to come. "You stupid kid." A year later, the scent of warm bread and melting butter filled the bright, airy space of the yellow crayon. It was Helen Carter's bakery. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating the happy chatter of customers and the glass cases filled with pastries that were tiny works of art. The bakery was more than a business. It was a community hub, a place of warmth and welcome. Helen, in a clean white apron, moved with a calm, happy confidence, greeting her regulars by name. She was no longer a ghost polishing a world that wasn't hers. She was the creator of her own small, perfect world, and she shared it generously. Clara, now 11 and on the cusp of teenagehood, sat at a corner table, her sketchbook open. Her drawings were more confident now, shaded with a skill that hinted at a future career. She had a real art tutor, a gentle woman paid for by the education fund the general had established for her. But she still drew the world as she felt it. Today, she was sketching a group of children laughing at the table next to her, capturing not just their faces, but their joy. Their lives had been transformed, but they had not been changed. The money had provided security, not luxury. Their home was comfortable, not ostentatious. Helen still believed in the dignity of a hard day's work. Clara still believed in the quiet power of observation. Once a month, they had Sunday dinner with Uncle Jim. General Peterson had become family. He would sit in their small living room, a cup of tea in his hands, and tell Clara stories about the boy who had been her grandfather. He didn't talk about battles or medals. He talked about how Michael Carter used to share his rations with stray dogs, how he could make the other soldiers laugh even when they were scared, and how he always wrote letters home, filled with hope for the daughter he hadn't yet met. Through these stories, the ghost in the photograph became a man. The general was repaying his debt not with money, but with memory, giving Helen the father she'd lost, and Clara the grandfather she'd never known. One evening, after the general had left, Helen found Clara standing in the living room, looking at the framed drawing on the wall, the jagged mountain and the sturdy oak tree. "Do you ever think about him?" Clara asked quietly. "The angry man." Helen came and stood beside her, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I feel sad for him. He had so much, but he didn't have any kindness. So he really had nothing at all." She looked at the drawing. "You saw it, right from the start. You saw who he was. Never lose that, Clara. Never stop seeing the truth in people." Clara leaned her head against her mother's side. "The oak tree is you," she whispered. "And it's Uncle Jim. And it's Grandpa Michael, too." Helen hugged her tight, her heart full. Out the window, life went on. The city hummed. People went about their days, and the old Thorn Tower, now renamed the Heritage Plaza, stood against the skyline, its identity washed clean. It was just a building now, its power to intimidate gone. It was a testament to the fact that true power is not in the height of the towers we build, but in the foundations of character on which we stand. It was a story about how a dropped crayon, a child's clear eye, and a mother's quiet dignity could change the world. Or, at the very least, change their small, perfect corner of it, proving that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest, and that kindness, passed down from a hero in a muddy trench to the daughter he never met, and to the granddaughter who drew the truth, is the only legacy that truly endures. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.